Hello people, back at it again, another episode of The World is Burning. Back from my holidays in America, was in Maine, seeing some family. If you ever get the chance to go to Maine, one of the best states going, in my opinion it is the best state out there, a bit of a random one. I had some good comments on that last video that we did, we had 95 comments, so I'll do some videos cruising the comments again guys. But we're getting straight back into it. The news of the day is layoffs still. It's getting worse out there, people. Big news of the day. Microsoft to lay off 1,900 people across Xbox and Activision Blizzard. Look at this. These are all just people, all these companies going over this news of Microsoft. I mean, wow, look at this. These are some of the biggest companies in the world laying people off. Honestly, I think this layoff, the next round of layoffs is going to be the tinder that starts the big fire that is going to start this economic collapse. Even eBay aren't safe. I mean, eBay to lay off 1,000 workers. Los Angeles Times to lay off 20% of its workforce. People are downsizing. These companies aren't small companies either, people. Business Insider, lay off 8% of its workforce. Now, these are substantial amounts of people that are getting laid off. Los Angeles Times, they're getting hit with it as well. Business Insider from Bloomberg, once again, they're reporting on it. So what's going to happen when all these people are getting laid off? It's not just like, 100 people getting laid off, one company doing layoffs, it's everyone. But then at the same time, we have this hiring freeze going on. Bank of America are cutting jobs 3 days before bonuses. They're not going to be hiring anyone anymore. Salesforce has reported a hiring freeze. Wizz Air. These are huge companies, people, and when the huge companies start laying people off, we should all be worried. So let's jump into it. Once again, I haven't watched any of these videos. We're going to see what the world of TikTok is saying about all these layoffs.
Okay, news broke that eBay was laying off 9% of their workforce yesterday.
Even eBay out safe.
Breck's laying off, I think, 20%. That all came in the same day. There have obviously been other layoffs as well. I've talked about it a bit. All this month, all in January. And so I got to thinking, how bad is January? How bad is this month? And so I went and looked at charts in layoffs.fyi because I'm a data guy. And there's two ways to read this, and I would be curious for your thoughts. The first way is the pessimist's way. It's where you look at the run rate we're at, right? We're about 2/3 of the way through January. You think, well, we're going to probably end up about 15,000. We're at 10,000 and change right now. That puts us right around May of 2023. That's our comp, right? Like that's the last time it was that high. In between, all those other months in between last May and now have been lower than that. And so you look at that and it looks like a bit of a U-shaped pattern in the data. And so you can think to yourself, well, from a macro perspective, this could get a little bit worse because startups that need to raise and can't are going to have to let go of employees. That's one way to read that. There's a different way, though, and that's a little bit of an optimistic take. If you look at January and you say, we're going to end up at 15,000, and the correct comp, the correct comparison point is actually January of the prior year, it's looking way better. It's like 1/4 of where January ended up or less in 2023. And of course, that was a historically difficult month in tech. And that depends on how you read business cycles, and it depends on the macro environment. Because either you read the chart and you say, I think, the story in 2024 is going to be around startups going to the wall, and a lot of smaller scale startups will add up. Or you say...
Just going to pause it here. I know exactly what he's saying. If you compare it to the 2023 figures, January was horrific last year. But these aren't startups, what we're talking about here. These aren't startups. Microsoft isn't a startup. Activision Blizzard isn't a start-off. Wizz Air isn't a start-up. Bank of America. It's going to get bad, guys. I'm going to be on the negative side. Leave me a comment. Do you agree with this guy? Are you on the optimistic side? Pessimistic side? I'm pessimistic.
Big companies tend to make cuts in January. That's when it hurts the worst. And yes, we'll continue to get a drip and drop of startups sort of having to hit the wall and let go of people through the year. It will be elevated versus 2010's levels, but it will decrease from January probably. And the fact that big companies making plans are doing their cuts now, and it's still, knock on wood, not anywhere close to January of 2023, is a good sign. I tend to read it as a good sign. I tend to read it the optimist way. I tend to say, look, most of those numbers are driven by big company layoffs, because just by definition, when they lay people off, they lay them off at scale. And so, like when eBay dropped 1,000 people, that's 10% of the number we've had so far this month from one company. You had similar huge numbers on Amazon and Google back in January of last year. You had Google laying people off this January already, also a fair number. So I read it as driven by these giant companies from a numbers perspective. And so I think it's likely that we will see a decline. I think it's likely that we will see fewer layoffs going forward in the rest of the year because they've done their thing. Now, I know that Google said there will be some impacts throughout the year. Yeah, but it won't be gigantic bunches of people in the same way. Like that's clearly the intent of that message, to say we're going to continue to look at right-sizing business units, but we're going to do that, and you're going to see effects hit individual teams, not effects hit entire business units in the same way. That's the optimist take. I think that's where I land. I think that is the most accurate read of the data.
Shout out this guy, Nate B. Jones. That was an insightful take. He could be right. He could be right, but I don't feel like this is stopping anytime soon, guys. Leave me a comment with your thoughts.
I work for a tech company that has been around for 20 years and has never done layoffs. It's always been a part of their kind of culture and mission, something they've been able to say. And this morning they announced their first round of layoffs. And I have not been affected yet. As of right now, I'm not getting laid off in this round, but it doesn't mean that I'm not soon. And it just goes to show how job security really just does not exist anymore. Working for a company that has never done layoffs for 20 years does not mean that they're not going to just lay you off tomorrow.
Also, just want to point this comment out here. I went through this once it started. It was so many rounds. I got laid off in the 7th round, people. So this girl's saying the first round she didn't get laid off. Companies will do up to 7, 8, 9, 10. They'll just keep going in these rounds. If your company is starting to do layoffs, you've got to start looking elsewhere. Have a bit of a backup plan going. You don't want to be caught out thinking, oh, it's not going to happen to me. These companies don't love you. They don't owe you any loyalty, and they will cut you if they have to.
Unless you work for yourself, you are so replaceable at a drop of a dime. There's people that have been laid off that have worked for this company for 8, 10 years. Some of them, these people have been around since I've been in middle school that are getting laid off. And I feel guilty because I still have a job and they don't, but also like it's not my fault, but I just don't know how to.
Yeah, she should be having having a CV ready to go. She should be talking to some other companies ready just in case it happens to her. You don't want to get caught out, guys.
Media and big tech layoffs. Why is it happening? Inflationary forces. Is there going to be recession? Interest rates are higher. Those are all the factors. Here's what those factors cause. The cost of employing someone is more. So you'll see major companies, major media companies that will staff up when it's easier to borrow money, meaning the interest rate is lower. We saw a lot of that with record interest rates. They were so low for so many years. And then as the Fed over the last 2 years began to raise rates, the cost to borrow money, and many times large companies, certainly media companies that are very speculative, certainly tech companies that are very speculative, they will borrow money for talent, right? And so if it doesn't pay off, remember, they're speculative. There's a little bit of gambling here, you know what I mean? A little bit of craps. Okay, here we go. A roll, and let's see if it works. What do? They start laying people off when the bet doesn't play out. So don't read too much into it. You'll see large companies that lay people off.
Yeah, well, I am going to read into it because I don't think these companies, these large companies, are as financially sound as we all think. I'm sure this news will start coming out, but there's a reason all these companies, they know something's coming, they're trying to restructure, they're trying to get their costs down, and it's Microsoft, guys, it's Google, it's all these huge companies, it's not like a little startup. Yeah, I don't see this slowing down. Leave me a comment.
This is me 5 hours before I think I'm gonna be laid off.
Or I hope you had a restful holiday, because if you are planning to job search, One of the reasons why Google is preparing to do so many layoffs, along with cutting down on perks like childcare and snacks, is because they know they're no longer the best game in town. Compare Google with a new app like Perplexity, for example. If I search the best things to do in New York, the first 5 results on Google are ads. And then I scroll down some more, I get a bunch of questions, and then some blue links that I need to click on to maybe get the answers that I'm looking for. Compare this with Perplexity, where bam, I get straight up the best answers. This is what Google would look like if they didn't care about selling you ads. But they can't do it because ads is 60% of all of the money that they make. And you cannot sell ads if you give people the right answer immediately. There used to be a time where Google was the best because they cared the most about your experience. But that's not the case anymore. That's why Google is preparing to get slapped in the face, because they know it's only a matter of time before people realize what it feels like to get the answers you're looking for straight away. And that's why...
Yeah, that's not really directly layoff related, I guess, but yeah, I've actually, leave me a comment. I've found Google to be going downhill quite recently. It's just all ads. You have to be searching through loads of pages to find what you want to find. It's not as user friendly as it used to be. But yeah, Google are cutting people back. People, look at that, 30,000 jobs. 30,000 jobs. That's not an insignificant amount.
Okay, so I know it feels like this is a repeat of last year. We're seeing so many layoffs happen. But to put it in perspective, there have been 10,000 people who have been laid off in 2024 compared to 90,000 last year. I don't know about you guys, but every single time I log on to LinkedIn and TikTok, it feels like just as many people got laid off this year as last year, but that's seriously not the case. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there about layoffs and the possibility of them happening. I would just go to say that hopefully the worst is over. We should still see some layoffs throughout the year, but it's not going to be anything like 2023 or 2022. I think we can all agree, though, that the job market is pretty bad right now. It's taking so long.
And here's the other thing, guys. Yeah, in 2023, there were a lot of layoffs, but there was still quite a lot of jobs, decent jobs going out there that you could go and you could replace the job that you lost with a comparable job quite easily. Not as easily as, when previously, but they were still out there. The jobs aren't there anymore for these people. So that's what a lot of people aren't even taking into account, really. And actually, I've noticed this one as well in my LinkedIn. What's even more odd is I've been getting the same number of recruiters messaging me the past week as when jobs were abundant in the past year. I've noticed this. Recruiters are still going strong, getting in touch with people. And look at this one, guys. Wayfair, another huge company, they're going to lay off 1,000 employees. So it's like, this isn't small companies.
To get hired, and it feels like companies are being extra selective with the people that they're hiring. However, January, February is the time when companies are figuring out their budgets, especially smaller companies, and it could be a really awesome opportunity if you are looking for a job to take advantage of that. Tomorrow I'll be hosting my first ever TikTok live, and I highly encourage that if you're going through layoffs or you are simply looking for a new job, please feel free to join.
I'm constantly amazed by just how bad the job market is. And here's what I'm telling my clients why it's going to get worse before it's going to get better. Going back to the panini, we all got a taste of working from home and working in our sweatpants and not wanting that to end. Then AI burst onto the scene with ChatGPT and Bard, which then made job search easier because people started using AI to write their resumes, and now there are companies that will let you submit 100 applications in what would have taken you the time to just submit one application. But in 2022 and 2023, a lot of companies laid off a lot of their senior recruiters to save money. I know one popular company that laid off 50% of their recruiting staff, all senior recruiters. So these companies have half of the recruiting staff. To make matters worse, the tech that recruiters are using, so applicant tracking systems, don't use AI, and those ATS systems can't handle the influx of job applications. So imagine being a recruiter and you're used to sorting through 200 resumes a day, and that turned into 2,000 a day. Your workload just went up by 1,000%. So we have people who want to work remotely. AI is helping people who used to write terrible resumes write better ones. AI is also making it easier for people to apply to jobs. There aren't enough skilled recruiters to do the work, and they're just not trained to handle this new workload. And companies keep laying off their staff to save money because they need to hire people and pay them lots of money so that they can jump on this new AI tech, or their businesses are going to fail. Now, if you made it this far in the video, I'm going to give you some goodies and some help. You have to network. And I know networking sounds like a dirty word, but referrals will be really key and helpful. Set up job alerts, so when a job gets posted, you're one of the first to apply. Because the reality is that the longer you wait to apply, the less likely the recruiter will even look at your resume because...
Yeah, and there is a massive influx going on right now, guys. and what she said is correct. Networking is kind of key these days. You don't want to just be a piece of paper or an email with a CV. You kind of want to know someone to help you get in. And ultimately, guys, she's not lying about this. AI is taking over everything, and there's a lot of people who will just get sorted out very, very quickly. Like, this is not a good CV, not a good resume, you're not getting the job. Now people can go on AI, use some ChatGPT, all sorts of stuff. They can put together a cracking resume, and even if they're not qualified, it's taking time away from the recruiters who will be looking at the good applicants. So yeah, no, it's rough out there, guys.
All right, now we're seeing.
Yesterday, the tech company that I work for laid off 10% of our workforce.
Wow.
Somehow I survived, but that's not the point. The point is that, as I said through listening to our CEO's monologue announcing these cuts, the only thing that I could think of was that I cannot leave my fate and my livelihood in the hands of these corporations, because it does not matter how good you are at your job, or how many hours you put in, or how hard you work, because at the end of the day, they don't care. They're not loyal to you. They're loyal to themselves, and they're loyal to money. So my goal this year is to set up additional sources of income for myself, so that if I'm laid off tomorrow, I have some sort of insurance, some sort of income flowing in. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And if you're interested in watching me see how to set these up without having any experience or knowledge, follow along so that we can learn to...
Yeah, and that's it, guys. Your plan A can always be, I'm not going to get laid off. That's plan A. But you need plan B, C, D, E, F, and G these days. You genuinely need that many different plans. She's right as well. People are going to need to rely on having different income sources. Back in the day, you could work a 9 to 5, have money coming in, and you're pretty much set. Not these days, people. Not these days.
So unfortunately, my prediction for less layoffs in 2024 is proving to be incorrect, at least if the first 2 weeks of January is any indicator of what we can expect for the rest of the year. Because there's been a huge increase in the number of companies who have announced layoffs in the first 2 weeks of January that will impact at least the next quarter or half year.
Just going to pause this here, look at this one. I got laid off on Friday from a tech recruiter position. If you're working in tech recruitment right now, you really need to be open and honest, going, this probably isn't going to be a job that I'm going to have much longer. You need to have another plan going on, people.
Include Discord, which is 17% of their workforce, Unity Software, 25% of their workforce. 25%. Google has announced another layoff. This is in addition to the one we just talked about, for another 1,000 people. Amazon Prime Video and MGM, which is also owned by Amazon, Amazon's Twitch service, which is 35% of their workforce, a 5% reduction in Audible or audible.com. BlackRock has announced a 3% reduction in force. We also see Duolingo. We talked about that previously. Citigroup has announced a massive layoff of 20,000 people. So this is a deep cutting one, and makes you wonder if things are okay going into 2024 with regard to the and this isn't an all-inclusive list. There are other companies who have announced layoffs as well. Now, obviously, this isn't the news that we want to hear starting off the beginning of the year, but I will say, based on my LinkedIn feed, I am seeing still a lot of job postings and people who are landing great opportunities, and people that I know that have been looking for a little while who have finally kind of broken through and landed a job that they're really interested in. So keep at it, try to ignore the chatter as best you can, and keep powering through, because that's the only choice we have. And for those of you who have jobs today, you may want to read the tea leaves and keep a pulse on what's going on in your organization and probably the broader industry, so that you can be in front of these layoffs. Now's the time to prepare your resume, start getting your networking in order. I know a lot of people don't like to use LinkedIn, but it's a great place to start building up passive networks. so that if you need to, you can make a jump more quickly and smoothly. And of course, I'm here to help in the unfortunate event that you find yourself on the wrong side of a layoff, to get you back on your feet as quickly as you can. Check out my website.
And this is why an emergency fund is so important as well, people, because you've got to be doing all this stuff in the background, preparing a potential move. But if it does hit you suddenly, you need to have an emergency fund, a nice amount of cash ready so you can not have to go in debt just to survive.
Okay, breaking news. If you work in tech, the US government might have just gotten you fired. My name is Johnny. I run a $40 million tech company, and I'm here to give you insider tips on how to succeed in the tech industry. Now, you know all those tech layoffs that happened in 2023? Well, they're about to get a lot worse, and there's one thing to blame for this. It is a US tax law called Section 174 that affects startup companies. The US tax law, Section 174, clearly states that basically all costs related to R&D cannot be expensed, including labor for software development. Instead, these costs will have to be amortized over 5 years if you live in the US, or 15 years if the labor is done from outside of the US, aka remote companies hiring overseas. So this basically means that if you're a software engineer, a UX designer, a researcher, a product manager, anybody at a tech company that builds the product or can be considered research and development, your salary cannot be expensed for tax purposes. So in this example, this company made $1 million of revenue, but they also spent $1 million in 2021, and thus they made nothing in 2021 in terms of profit, so they have to pay zero tax. In 2022, when Section 174 was introduced, they still made $1 million in revenue and spent $1 million of that on research and development. However, because the expense of that has to be now amortized over 5 years, in the first year, only $100,000 of that was recognized as something that can be deducted or expensed. And therefore, in this version of the world, that company actually quote unquote made $900,000 in profit when they really didn't, because they spent all $1 million of that. And suddenly they have to pay $189,000 of which they do not have. And this only gets worse year to year as we go on. Now imagine you're a software engineer that works at Meta or Google, and I don't know, you were hired for say $189,000 a year in 2022. Well, in 2022, that company would have had to pay $0 in taxes to keep you around. However, fast forward a year later, they would have to pay your entire salary's worth just to keep you as an engineer. No wonder we had so many layoffs in 2023, and probably will again in 2024. And while this might have been put in place with the intention of having someone like Amazon or Meta pay more tax, ultimately this actually hurts you as the employee and also small startup companies, because these companies will no longer be able to afford keeping you around. Instead, they'll only keep the top tier of engineers on their roster, and you're probably going to get let go.
I actually didn't know anything about that. That's quite interesting stuff. I'll have to do a bit of digging on that. Yeah, leave me a comment, guys. If you're in a tech company and you've been laid off, or your friends or your colleagues are being laid off, leave me a comment, guys. I love to hear from the ground from you directly. We'll do one more than get out of here, but it's really not looking too good for these layoffs in 2024.
Plot twist on layoff culture. So I am much older than you young techies getting laid off and not knowing what the hell's going on. None of us know, right? Well, this started with me 2 years ago. For the last 2 years, I've been laid off 4 times.
Wow.
It's not fun. And you can be left with that feeling of like a really abusive relationship, right? Like it's very, very similar. I posted about this on LinkedIn, and a CEO of a company I used to work for reached out to me recently and wants to schedule some time to explain why this is happening. Now, I want to know your thoughts, because he has put time on my calendar to break it down. It's been 2 years. It's been 2 years since I've been laid off from that company. So why is he reaching out to me?
Yeah, guys, leave me a comment. We'll leave it on that one there. Layoffs aren't looking good. I really want to hear from your guys on experience with this. I've been laid off a few times in the past. Recently, I haven't been laid off, but yeah, I'm not seeing it's going to get any better. I just can't see it getting better right now. Leave me your prediction for 2024, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.